Hello and welcome to this one-on-one interview on how CIOs are navigating the current changes. I'm Arif Mohammed, a contributing editor at Computer World, and today I'm joined by Scott Cairns, CTO and Head of Security at T-Systems Northern Europe. Hello Scott, and thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, good to be here, thanks.
Today we're chatting about a number of things: changing IT and business priorities, IT leadership, modernisation with frozen or capped IT budgets, and remote working and what it means for cybersecurity. So Scott, sorry to start on a negative, but we've had lockdowns, an economic downturn, and a massive shift to remote working. How much have business and IT priorities shifted this year as a result?
I think initially when the lockdown occurred, things did shift quite dramatically. All of a sudden it was more around how do we secure the workforce? Because all of a sudden you had a workforce that was used to working in offices and all of a sudden moving to the home environments. And
Right.
that's a very different practice to get into the habit of doing.
Yeah.
So initially, I think a lot of customers or clients seem to hold off on massive digitalization projects for the year and focused more on how do we get our workforce fully operational again in this new alien environment, should we say? Because we saw a big peak in our security engagements through about March, April time. And when people started to settle down over the year, we found now they're starting to go back to bringing the big projects on board again and doing more work they had planned at the start of the year.
So are you seeing an acceleration of digitization now that they've got the all of that out of the way? Your CEO, Adel Al-Saleh, says the things that would normally take months or years to happen are happening over a weekend.
Yeah, I think we are seeing more of this now. Now everyone's got the hang of this new remote way of working, and this is the new normal we're all going to be using for the foreseeable future. I think businesses are just getting back to what they need to do. So what do I need to do to transform my business? And I think the way that people are working from different environments now is actually, it is accelerating the adoption of cloud and the adoption of digitalization. We need to come up with better ways of working, whether it be simple things like collaborative remote working or doing video calls like this, or whether it's actually how do we actually interact with our customers moving forward. So if we can't visit them face to face, we need to come up with better ways of working. And this leads to better solutions, which leads to how do we enter the digital world with 2 feet rather than just dipping our toe in the water, should we say?
Yeah, absolutely. And what has the impact been on T-Systems business? I read that your parent company, Deutsche Telekom, saw a multi-100% increase in its fixed line usage, mobile voice and video, and more interesting cloud collaboration platforms.
Yeah, I think what people tend to forget is obviously because we ourselves look after our customers, what we saw at the start of the whole lockdown was we had to mobilize our workforce from home too. So we saw a ramp up of the amount of users on our remote connection solutions going from 20,000 to 80,000 over a very short period of time.
Yeah.
But once we were there, we knew we had the ability to take our customers there too. So we have seen this increase in all of our clients and our prospects when it comes to actually moving the workforce forward and moving forward with the digital collaboration world.
Oh, I see. And shifting topics a bit, have you seen any shift in senior IT functions in how they've had to adapt their roles within the organization?
We've obviously seen a lot more where I suppose chief information security officers and the emergence of chief information risk officers are taking a bit more of a center stage. You know, all of a sudden now you've got a corporate environment that's working in a very alien way. And so the CISOs have been given a little more flexibility and power to try and put in place the measures they've been trying to do for a long time in order to secure their environments and make it a more robust working environment for their employees, should we say. So I think that's roles we have seen move front and center a bit more. On the other side, I think we've seen a lot more of the CIOs who are digital native moving more into the digital role. So operating years ago, people talked about the chief digital officer. It never really came to much. And I think now it's just a view that the CIO incorporates that digital persona. So the sort of agendas now on the top of the list, working with the CEOs to understand how to move things forward. Yeah. So we have seen roles shift, but no real dramatic change. It's just more of an adaptation and I suppose amalgamation of roles, people taking on more responsibility in a different area.
That is really interesting. And you mentioned kind of robust infrastructures. What about the underlying infrastructure from the edge to core data centers? What shifts are going on at the moment?
So we're all used to working in our offices, as we said earlier on, where we're in controlled premises. You know, we were starting to get used to the fact that some of our employees worked in coffee shops and hotels, but now all of a sudden to be working at home. You know, our home broadband setups were never really designed or geared up to handle corporate-based levels of work, whether it be from the security on the devices at home or whether it be the speed of connectivity. Back at the start of the lockdown, we were asked to do a bit of a presentation on this. I did I think it was a round table, there's about 100 people there. Okay. And it's more around how to secure your home environment because we all take it for granted that we get our Sky routers and our Virgin routers and everything else, and we leave the default settings on there. Yeah. but that's a very high security risk for, boxes that are put in by men from vans you've got no control over. And
Right.
also the corporate environment that extends into your home has to take consideration as to who put that box in. Have the
Yes.
default settings been reset? Have the security methods been put in place? So I think it's just a huge shift in the way we actually work in general. And that was quite good at the start of COVID to have the opportunity to talk to an audience about that and get everyone thinking about how we need to adapt to this new way of working.
Absolutely. Another aspect of having a remote and distributed workforce is business continuity. Are you seeing companies dusting off their business continuity and disaster recovery plans?
Yeah, very much so. You're effectively extending your network into people's homes and everything else that goes along with that. And over the years recently, we've seen a big rise in ransomware attacks, in attacks on environments, particularly now more in critical industry as well. So I think it is a time when people are saying, okay, let's look at our risk posture and let's look at our BCM plans. Are they actually applicable now in a cloud-based digital first world? Or do we need to adapt these to accommodate the way we work now, where a few years ago you wouldn't even contemplated a workforce distributed over people's homes? So the BCM practices need to adapt to this and need to take this into account.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott, you've touched on security. I'd love to dive a bit more into that. And we've spoken a lot about IT and infrastructure. When it comes to security and particularly different types of attacks, how are you seeing security and cyber criminals changing their behavior?
I think, yeah, the cyber criminals that attack on a regular basis, industry and corporations, they're not daft. They understand now there are vulnerabilities opening up with this remote workforce. So
Yes.
I think they are capitalizing on it. We've seen a rise, certainly the work I've been doing, the work we've been doing in T-Systems, we've seen a rise in the frequency of attacks and the adaption. So you'll get an attack, 1 week might be using one type of ransomware or malware mechanism, and then the adaption speed comes around very quickly now before other people use the same technology, but adapt slightly to move on to the next iteration. So I think that the time between attack proliferations is changing. It's accelerating as people take the previous attack, tweak it, and then roll it out again. And obviously, old-fashioned, should we say, defensive mechanisms cannot cope with the adaptation on that sort of speed.
Yeah.
You need to turn more towards machine learning, AI, things that can actually decipher what is a real attack and what's actually just a glitch on the network, should we say.
Absolutely. So we're needing more sophisticated defenses. That's a good
We
point.
definitely are, yeah.
The current situation requires a balancing act between implementing new technology and new security technologies and cost control and IT rationalization. Given the circumstances, how do you do both things well, do you think, Scott?
It's very difficult. Security has always been an area that had, should we say, not enough investment. It's like a car insurance policy. You don't need it until you need it. And that
Yeah.
seems to be the way with security over the years. I've been working in the security sphere for a long time, and it's always incremental gains to try and get companies to adapt to put more money into the security field. And any CISO will tell you the same thing. I think, unfortunately, it tends to take a breach or a threatened breach before people wake up and say, okay, yeah, maybe we do need to invest more in this area. But I think this whole way we've gone through the last 8 months of this lockdown has definitely helped when it comes to getting the ear of the boards to understand that there's a greater risk out there, and we need to be very, very careful, and we need to invest more into the security business. And we are seeing customers move away from traditional perimeter-based defenses and talking to us about what can you do in things like behavioral analytics or in machine learning-based architectures, or how do you make sure that nothing happens when it comes to insider threat? How do you defend against attack from the inside out? And these sort of measures that we wouldn't have thought about 10 years ago. It was all about robust firewalls and robust antivirus. Now it's more, okay, let's contemplate the idea that the attacker's got in. How do we deal with it once he's inside our network?
Yeah, absolutely. And more broadly, what are your top tips on adapting to changing times and moving forward when some semblance of normality returns? Where should IT and business executives be casting their eye?
I think there's a lot of companies are now talking about microsegmentation, zero trust models, the idea that we should trust no one and open up accordingly as appropriate. And I think that's the best way to go for most corporations. It requires a modicum of investment, but not as much as putting in huge AI solutions. But it means you're locking down your assets and your critical infrastructure. So if
Yes.
one thing gets compromised, you're not opening the whole network up to the same sort of attack. So I think that's the first and foremost what companies should be looking at is the zero trust models. Once you put that in place, you can start to look at more sophisticated measures. There's a few companies now getting involved in what they all term AI. You've got to be very careful. A few are really talking about data analytics and calling it AI. But there are some companies out there who do specialize in what I would class as real artificial intelligence or machine learning based solutions. things that actually look at the network and look at the activity and monitor for abnormalities. If you think about when you look at a TV program and you're watching the police doing a polygraph, it's the
Yes.
same sort of idea. It's saying, what is my baseline? And thereby I now know when something starts to spike or I see incremental change, this is something abnormal, and I can take directive action to lock ports down, to cancel user accounts, to block things, to try and defend what's going on before it hits anything critical, should we say, in the environment. So that's the next step, is look at how you can start to engage with the next generation of technologies like next-gen firewalls, machine learning, to try and get a handle on what your environment should look like in order to understand when things go off the rails a little bit.
Brilliant. So checking anomalies against and attacks against your baseline, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
And lastly, how can T-Systems help businesses?
So we found ourselves in an interesting position when this all happened, because we operate 6 or 7 global SOCs. We've got the Cyber Defense Center in Bonn, and they're already using things like machine learning to sift through 30 million attacks a day to determine what should be done with these sort of attacks, to look at deception technology. So with T-Systems, we found we're in a good position to try and help customers who all of a sudden find themselves operating in a very unique circumstance and how they actually adapt. So we've been doing a lot of work with people on vulnerability assessments to say, okay, let's take it that potentially something is going to get in. Let's make sure that we limit what it can get exposure to. So making sure it's the age-old things, are your patches up to date? Have you got your up-to-date firewall firmware? Is your antivirus up to date? But these sort of vulnerability assessments give you a really clear view of the landscape. And then you can say, well, where do I need to target my time in order to minimize the exposure, should we say, to the outside attacks?
Yeah, absolutely right. So good housekeeping and good technology as well. That's brilliant. We are living through changing times. I seem to be saying that a lot this year, but there are ways to navigate through to IT and business success, and security technologies and strategies on hand to assist. I'd like to thank Scott Cairns from T-Systems for sharing his views and expertise today. And if you're watching and would like to know more, you can go to tsystems.com. I am Arif Mohammed. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next time.